Hey guys, and welcome back to another video. Today we're looking at a plugin that you probably have seen a lot out on YouTube. I think a lot of people are reviewing this plugin, and that's Slate's Digital MO-TT. Now, if you didn't watch Friday's Free Plugin Friday, the last Free Plugin Friday, you might not know, but my computer, which I got last year, which is fairly powerful, 32 gig of RAM, all of that, has basically killed itself. Fault in the power supply, took down the graphics card. I'm not sure about everything else. It's in the work of getting repaired. So I'm running my old PC, and that just means there's probably going to be frame drops. There may be a few dropouts. So I just want to start the video letting you know why. We aren't, running at our best. Though this plugin for what it does seems to be efficient enough. I've put it on a fair few different sources and hasn't really completely collapsed. But that's not with recording software going, OBS going at the same time. Often that can cause issues. Anyway, let's go have a look at the plugin. Enough of my excuses. So what is MO-TT? Well, if you're not aware, MO-TT is Slate's interpretation, advanced interpolation, however you want to think about it, of the OTT setting in Ableton, which stood for over the top, which is basically an upward and downward compressor designed for extreme compression and extreme change in the sound. There was also a plugin called OTT, which was also based on that, though many would argue it doesn't sound the same, and I can't get MO-TT to sound like that plugin either. So they're kind of different, similar flavored cups of tea, but that plugin is free, so you can still get that as well if MO-TT can't do those sounds, and MO-TT can do a lot more because it's super advanced. So at the moment we're in advanced view, and you can see how advanced it is. So let's go back to easy view. I'm just going to talk quickly about the easy view controls. Then we're going to show what it really does on a already pre-mixed song. Then we'll dive into the advanced features. So it is going to be a fairly lengthy video. There's a lot to cover here, and I'm still not going to come close to covering all this plugin can do. So we've got some music here from WA Production. I can't even remember which pack this is. One of the packs I bought. If you do like WA Production packs, use my affiliate link, but I paid for this. I'm not getting paid to play it in this. I just kind of wanted some dance stuff because OTT is famously used on a lot of EDM. So we're going to just listen to it, and then I'm going to turn it on. Then I'm going to talk about the controls. So here it is, no OTT. Then we'll turn on the OTT on the default settings. Super extreme, of course. Okay, so what are we looking at? Well, we have this quick set, and this is your starting point. OTT is the original setting. Hip hop is designed for hip hop, and Vox is obviously designed for when you want to use it on vocals. And these basically change a lot in the back end, stuff that's going on in the advanced tab, to get you close to what you might want in your kind of use. So that's that side. You have clipper that goes on and off depending on the advance as well, where it's clipping a threshold. That all depends on advance. You have a soft knee and hard knee for the compression type, and you have RMS and peak detection for the threshold control, or really the detection of when you're going to compress. Then you have the amount, which is the most important control, and you also have amount for each of the bands. You have a low and high tone control, which is pretty much like a passive EQ kind of thing. And you have timings, which affect the attack and release. Shorter attack and release, longer attack and release. So I kind of need to explain what MO-TT is doing and what this kind of compression is. Basically, you split the signal into 3 bands using filters. And then you have both upward and downward compression. So with downward compression, when it passes the threshold, and say, so let's pretend we all set the threshold the same at -6, for example. When it goes above -6, if we had the threshold there, everything gets compressed downwards. But what MO-TT also does is have upward compression. Anything below the threshold is brought up in volume at a certain ratio. So this is what gets a really extreme compression. So all your quiet stuff gets boosted, depending on where that threshold is. So let's say that threshold is -12. Well, anything under -12 gets boosted by a ratio. So say we'd put ratio of 2 to 1 on all of them, anything below -12. So your signals at -12 will be boosted, while your signals above 6 will be brought down by a 2 to 1 ratio. And so you can kind of sausage stuff using these two compressors. But what gets really interesting, because you're using it across 3 bands, and you can have different ratios and different thresholds, you get really, really complicated multi-band compression going on. For example, you could have a certain signal that has a lot of high end in it. And what ends up happening is the high end gets compressed down whenever those transients hit. But the low end and mids gets pushed up at the same time, or the whole time, because they're not triggering as much, and you get this kind of interesting sway going on. It's easier just to kind of show. The last thing to really talk about control wise is here is your basically boosts afterwards. So this is kind of your makeup gain for each band. So what I'm going to do is bring this makeup gain all the way to 0. And then the way I like to dial in OTT, so the plugin, and of course MO-TT as in this plugin, is you get the input gain so that it triggers it downward on the loud parts and triggers it upward on the quiet parts, instead of significantly going one way or the other. So let's just start off with that, and we'll kind of see how it's useful. So as we can see, it's way too loud. It's compressing all the time. It's downward compressing. Where we want this, we want a little bit of this flip-flopping. Okay, so let's make up for the gain loss. Still a bit loud. There we go. And then you reduce the amount a lot because we're on the master bus. And fix the volume difference. So now we're massaging. So this is how I'd use it on a master, for example. I'm not looking to drastically change it. I just want to massage it a bit. And of course I can adjust it for each thing. So maybe there's too much going on in the low end. So just bring the low end amount a little bit down. Too compressed in the high end, bring that down. And then when we want a little bit of highs, a little bit of lows. Maybe we want to bring a little bit of more of the low band makeup gain up as we're compressing that low end in the kind of drop section. And same with the highs. Off. Maybe make the timing a bit softer. Too much highs, I think. Now let's go to the quiet bit. So you can see that the low end's really being pushed here when there's no low end. It's really making the difference between the louder and the quieter bits of the song, the macro dynamics, extreme, right? Makes these bits sound huge. So what happens if we change it to hard knee? Let's bring the amount up so we can hear it more and go between these. So soft knee. hard knee. That timing is just a little bit more intense, right? Okay, let's have a look at peak instead. We're getting a little bit higher thresholds being peak, so we can turn it down a little bit. Back to RMS. Let's bring those timings really short. Let's have a look at the timings control. Now, one thing to note is with really short timings with multi-band compression like this, you're going to get a lot of distortion in the really short timing. This is just the artifact of compression that basically you're doing things quicker, especially in the low end than the wavelength. Because low signals have much larger wavelength, you're kind of compressing and uncompressing quicker than the wavelength, which adds distortion. So let's bring those timings down. Let's get to the kind of drop bit. Let's change it back to soft knee and RMS. A lot smoother with longer timings, but you're losing a lot of peak information. Where this is getting real pumpy, right? Depends on your source. Of course, this is on a master. You're going to want to go for slower timings because you don't really want to change the dynamics that dramatically. But when you're putting on leads, when you're putting on percussion, when you're putting on vocals, you might really want to drastically change how it sounds. So let's go a bit looser on the timings, bring that amount back. Maybe a bit more amount, a bit more low end. And what you can kind of really emulate here when you kind of work it like this, you're using the timings, is what is known as radio compression. And it's basically a multi-band compressor that radio stations have, and they tune them to have a certain sound so that all songs are the same volume, everything's the same volume. It used to be done a lot more than it is now, but it's still common on a lot of major radio stations. But you'll hear that as a certain station has a certain sound and everything's a little bit more compressed. But their timings are kind of set up so it's not obvious. It doesn't sound like there's a compressor kicking in. And that's, of course, what the timings are going to have here. So you're thinking, well, okay, that's on a master bus. It's probably a bit too extreme on a master bus. So let's go have a look at it on different sources, and we're going to dive into the advanced. One thing to note is it does come with presets. And for a lot of plugins, presets aren't the best thing to do, especially like EQs and stuff, because you need to figure out what you need for your certain signal, right? But here, presets is very useful because of the amount of control you have and the amount of aggressive kind of changes you get. So for example, let's just quickly, before we go to anything else, look at some of the master presets. So you can hear that they're all affecting both the EQ and the compression there. So let's dive over. Let's start off on something I think is really cool for this kind of plugin, and that's lead. So let's just listen to the lead by itself. Okay, this is bypass. Okay, so what have I done? Let's dive into advanced and have a look. Now this is where you have so much control. So let's talk about these controls. On this side, you have the slope. So this is basically the crossover in each of those frequency bands and how aggressive it is. You then have sidechain, which we will look at later because sidechain can be really powerful. You have input gain and stereo link. Then you have threshold for the downward and threshold for the upward. Now, what is in this section here is the macro control for all three bands. But each of these things, other than the slope, you have control of for each band, which is why it's so powerful. You also have attack and release times, and the same, the hard knee, RMS, and clipping. Now, the other thing you have that's really cool is this timing control, which goes between 3 different timings, and it's basically how it reacts to transients. For example, on maybe a mix, you want to use smooth because it's a lot more subtle, whereas on something aggressive, you may want to use smack, which allows a lot more transient to come through. We're going to keep on classic. We may later go through all of these on the same setting. So you kind of understand these. Let's dive into what these two sections are. And it's a very, very good interface, I reckon. I know I'm kind of doing this review a little bit more like explaining what it is. I've only spent 2 or 3 hours with this plugin, and I've figured out how to do everything pretty easily. I think that's just a testament to how easy to understand this is, especially if you kind of know what it's doing, if you understand downward compression, if you understand upward compression, if you understand multibands. So you have like I said, the downward threshold and the upward threshold. You also have ratios. Now, these ratios go from your normal 1:1 to infinity to 1, but they also go to negative ratios. And the cool thing about negative ratios is basically like if you imagine the threshold, an infinity to 1 ratio, which is a hard limiter, you go, signal hits the threshold and then doesn't get any louder, stays at the threshold. A negative ratio means the more that a signal goes over the threshold, the quieter it gets. And this can have some really cool pumping effects, especially on drums and room sounds. It makes the louder stuff quieter than the quiet stuff, which can lead to all kinds of insane sound design. So that is super powerful. But what's more powerful is, yes, you have that down here. You can go all the way to -1 for the upward. But you can also have expansion. Now, this is basically downward. So if you have a look, it's to 1, everything to 1, right? And then it becomes 1, and then the other side of the ratio goes up. So that's downward expansion. And it means that you can have almost gating on some frequencies and then upward compression on others, which can lead to all kinds of cool things, really control reverbs and stuff with it. And we're going to have a look at that later. Then you also got attack and release. And so, like I said, you have that for each of the bands, so you can really control each band separately. You also have crossover points for each of the bands. So you can drag these however you want to separate those bands, as well as low and high pass filters, which basically means you can have the effect not affect things below and above these filters. So if you don't want to affect the high end much, and you don't want to affect the very low end, and you want 3 different bands in the mid-range that you're going to control, you can do something like this, which makes this very powerful. So we're going to go back, and I'm going to start showing you how extreme things go. So the first thing I'm going to do is pull the upward compression out of all the way and pull the downward compression all the way up. So this basically means anything below here, which is nothing, that's like non-existent signal, anything above this threshold, which is 0, and nothing is going above it. You can see they're not really doing anything. Let's put the amount on full. Okay, I'm going to first do the downward compression because that's the most obvious. You can really hear that it's smashing the mid-range, right? So let's turn it all up. We're going to go to just under limiting, maybe. Yeah, limiting on the low band. So that's kind of understandable. So let's go bring that up. Let's have a look at the upwards compression. Now I'm going to turn the delay and reverb off, because then you can kind of hear the space in between. So we're going to just mute it for a second. Bypass it. So you can see what we're doing is we're boosting the low and high end because of where that threshold is. And then we bring this back down. You're really controlling that transient, you're really changing kind of the envelope of the sound while also completely changing the EQ dynamically. Okay, so I think the best way to show the expansion and the negative ratios is to go to something percussive. So we're going to go to, I think we've got kick and snare somewhere. We'll go to that, and I think that's going to show us really that kind of percussiveness. Okay, so now I'm on the kick and snare, and let's just put the ratios to 0, bring these up. Let's just basically zero out the entire thing. There is no kind of nothing on setting, which is annoying. I wish there was. But anyway, well, let's just do the drums. So it's mainly going to be kick. I'm going to bring the input down just to give us a little bit more headroom. So let's start off with where we were before with a very high ratio, close to infinity. There we go. Stream ratio, right? You can kind of hear it. Now let's go negative ratio. Let's increase the attack and release so you can really hear what's going on. I mean, obviously first you're going to get a little bit of distorted kick. But listen to now how the tail of that kick is louder than everything else. If we go back to the bit with the claps, I think. Whatever that was. The tails of everything are now louder because of that negative ratio. Okay, so let's go back and have a look at what the upwards compression can do with ratio and the expansion. So this is upward compression. You can hear what it's doing. It's bringing up all those tails. But if we go the other way, it's an expander, a downwards expander. So you put them together and you get some interesting stuff going on. So adjust that attack and release so we don't get as much. Give a little bit more headroom on the kick. Let's go a little bit less. Maybe on the low end we'll just do a limiter. We won't do the over compression. Now let's have a listen to some of this clipping. Sounds like clipping to me. So I may have lost you at this point. It is, like I said, quite advanced in what you can do. But basically the idea is, downward wise, you can do anything from subtle compression to limiting to over compression. And upwards wise, you can bring up the tail of everything according to your attack and release, or you can bring it down and expand it close to a gate, basically a gate with the less extreme kind of setting. A gate would be an infinity to 1 downward expander. So what I want to do now is have a look at using the side chain. And yeah, I'm going through all these different sections really quickly. because this is a video and I can't really cover everything. One thing you can do is, if you want more explanation, you can go to the Slate YouTube channel. They basically have each section and a few different tips in a form of video. So what I have done, let me just get these. Let's start off with this. So I've got two different reverbs using as a sidechain, and this is where we can do some really cool stuff. So we'll open up MO-TT, open up Valhalla. So I'm using a sidechain. What I'm actually doing is getting the leads sent to MO-TT as a sidechain, and we're compressing the reverb. So MO-TT at the moment is on my reverb channel, my reverb send. Then we're sending the sidechain from the leads that are getting sent to that reverb. And the idea is MO-TT is basically a multi-band ducker. So let's listen to the leads with no MO-TT. With MO-TT on. So what MO-TT is basically doing is ducking all these frequencies when it gets the synths, only on the reverb. So if we change the timings, you'll actually get the reverb pumping. What we can do is turn up the reverb to kind of show you the more extreme. And you hear when I stop it, reverb goes up in volume dramatically. But longer timings. And a lot of this, because the release time is so long, this timing is just a macro for your already existing release and attack times. So we can bring down the release and you'll hear how extreme it is. I mean, you're obviously getting distortion. Maybe we'll just bring it up a little bit. Off. Heaps of reverb. It's mainly ducking the mid-range, which allows a little bit of three-dimension going on without getting in the way of those leads. So let's go back to my other timings a little bit longer and listen in the mix. Off. I mean, it's mainly just bringing the reverb down, but it's doing it in a special way. Okay, now let's look at our second reverb, which we're doing a similar thing. So here on the percussion, we've got this percussion here, sending it through a reverb. So I've done a similar thing. This time, we're not using the sidechain. So I'll turn the sidechain off. We're just using the reverb signal. So I've got this reverb on this percussion. This is at dry. This is with the reverb on. We'll just turn off MO-TT for now. And then I've set up expanders. So basically what we're doing is feeding in the reverb and then downward expanding it. It's basically like a multi-band gate. So what we can do is gate the high end a bit more. And we can also compress it as well at the same time. And use the timings to change the length of the reverb. So what I'm really doing is changing the decay of the high end of the reverb and leaving the mid-range a little bit longer, but still cutting it down. So you're getting this kind of darker, feels like a smaller room, feels like you put up some carpet. Really like molding the reverb sound. If we change the ratio, not losing as much high end, change the timings, change the amount. So you can see the power you have on reverbs, using side chains, using the expander. It's really, really powerful tool as far as just doing some crazy shit with it. Yeah, anything from completely transforming leads to using it as a reverb controller. So hopefully so far you're still with me, you're kind of understanding it. I know I've been all over the place. It's one of those things where I kind of want to show every cool thing it does, but that is a 50-year long video because it does so many cool things. Last things I guess we should look at is the hip hop and Vox settings in the quick set, because they are kind of set in there. They're part of the easy menu. And I think they're kind of Slate reimagining the settings to work for those two different use cases. Now, I like the OTT plugin on Vox. It's really, really powerful at just getting Vox to sound like vocals, like straight away. And I also have used it on some kind of hip-hop stuff set really differently. So let's go have a listen. Now, what we're going to be doing is finding some media for that first, using some kind of built-in stuff. Okay, so first let's have a look at hip-hop. So what I've done here is I've got a drum loop and I've got a whirly. So nothing too insane. You know, two things you might use on a kind of hip-hop track. Depends on your version of hip-hop. But what I'm going to do is first put MO-TT on the master bus and see how it deals with these together on the hip-hop setting, and then we'll see how it deals on them individually. So we're just going to solo each one. This is going very extreme on the high end, so let's turn down the amount. Probably need to increase the input to kind of get it to trigger it a bit differently. Maybe just bring the highs down a little bit. Bypassed. Let's turn that whirly loop up a little bit. Drums up a little bit. It's a bit better. So it is adding life, it's adding a little bit of movement, but it's also like gluing together. But you are getting a little bit of noise as it's pushing those highs up with the upwards compression, and that's something that I see people don't understand. It is going to push all the noise up, especially when there is no sound. Okay, what about individually? So let's just solo the drums. Let's take it to the extreme. A lot of upwards compression going on here. Let's compare that to the original OTT setting. Hip hop. Completely different EQ setting. And you can see there's definitely way too much upward compression. Now that's something you can change just by going to the advanced and just bring this down. And maybe bring the ratio down just a touch. So all I've done is change the thresholds and the ratio a little bit. If you bring up the input gain and lower the output gain, you're kind of centering it around those frequencies like we did, around those thresholds, sorry, like we did before. Okay, what about the whirly? Off. Really cleaning up that mid-range a little bit, right? Adding a bit of distortion though. Let's bring out down the high amount so we're not emphasizing that as much. Maybe bring up the mid-range a little bit. Again, this is on the stereo out, so when I add the drums, it's also going to change how everything affects together. But it's just really interesting to note. So that has been the hip hop setting. Again, all that is just changing some stuff going on in the background, I imagine. Once you hit the advanced, I assume it's pretty much the same stuff. And the last is Vox, which is pretty extreme. Comes in nice purple. Now I'm just going to have to see if I've got any vocals that I can use. Like I said, my computer's dead and I haven't put my other hard drives in here yet. So let's go see if we can find some kind of vocals. Okay, so now I've found some vocals. I didn't have any to choose from, so we're going with these, but let's just see how the vocals setting really stands out. So first, bypassed.
Ooh, baby.
Just gonna turn them up a bit.
Ooh, sugar. I love you so. Ooh, never let me go.
I'm gonna take that first section because it doesn't have the doubles as much.
Ooh, baby.
You can hear it's really bringing up the reverb.
Ooh, sugar.
Bypassed again.
Ooh, baby. Ooh, sugar.
Back on.
Ooh, baby. Ooh, sugar.
Now, one important thing to note with this amount of compression going on, you are going to bring up everything. So if you have rumble, take it out. If you have a lot of hiss, gate it. All that kind of stuff needs to be gone, and probably don't add reverb before going into MO-TT because it is going to completely change those ambience levels. So if you don't have a really dry, clean vocal, you can get problems. But what it can really do is just stick a vocal right there. If you listen to a lot of pop music at the moment, there's certain producers that are using a lot of OTT or similar kind of techniques. One I definitely know music-wise is Dua Lipa. I know a lot of her tracks have OTT on her lead vocals, at least from some of the tutorials I have seen. And it makes sense because those vocals just sit right there and the music is huge. There's so much going on. There's a lot of compression going on and the vocals just sit right in your face. So something like this is great for getting vocals just to sit right there. So let's mess around with some settings and we'll kind of show you how it gets so aggressive, right?
Ooh, baby. Ooh, sugar.
Getting a little bit of slow response there, so I had to turn some plugins off. Let's have a look.
Ooh, baby. Ooh, sugar. Ooh, baby.
You're going to hear that noise, that background noise get pushed up.
Ooh, sugar.
So you want to keep the amount down if there is background noise.
Ooh, baby.
Off.
Ooh, sugar. Ooh, baby.
Now, I think this vocal's already been compressed heavily,
Ooh, sugar.
but this just takes it to the extreme.
Ooh, baby.
And those timings are a bit unnatural.
Ooh, sugar. Ooh, baby.
Okay, so what about on multiple vocals? This end section is being doubled and harmonied.
I love you so. Ooh, never let me go. I love you so.
That just nice high end there, just
Never let
huge.
me go. I love you so.
You can afford to push up that high end a bit.
Never let me go. I love you so.
Now, one thing we could do is reduce the upward on the high end a little bit.
Never let me go.
We're basically limiting the high end.
I
Increase
love
that
you
high
so.
amount. Bring that release back a
Never
little
let me
bit.
go. I love you so.
Now this is kind of a little bit like an exciter, a little bit like the
Never let me go.
Dolby A trick. Not the same, but you're basically compressing the high end and then pushing it up.
So
off.
Never let me go.
Back on.
I love you so. Never let me go.
You're really flattening out the differences in those frequencies and getting a much more consistent sausage kind of frequency range. Like I said, that's really good for fitting vocals in, because the thing with vocals that's important to remember is each word, each way you sing it, each breath has a different frequency range. Now, if you've got a huge open vocal and a sparse track, that's what you want. Those huge dynamics, that really, really nice change in tone is part of the character. But when you're trying to fit it into a dense dance track where there's so many other things going on in the mid-range, you've got lead synths, you've got pads, you've got really heavy hitting kicks, those subtleties are lost, and what you end up getting is a loss of words, a loss of pronunciation, a really lack of clarity. And something like this is so great for just cementing it. So every word hits you in your face. Every word has plenty of diction. It's just like really full on. It's like I'm over enunciating, like I'm doing right now. I'm kind of yelling a little bit, but that's kind of the point. This plugin can do something like that. So I'm going to leave it there. Again, apologies about some of the computer stuff. I know that some of the reaction is slow. On most of your PCs, MO-TT won't be doing that. It'd be very, very smooth. And it's only because I started stacking a lot of different instances across this entire project. Plus, I'm screen recording that I got a lot of that in practice. And when I had my other computer working, which is when I first downloaded MO-TT, it worked really smoothly and really nicely. So go check it out. It does a lot more than the original OTT, but it's basically that same kind of thing. Now, there is some interesting phase stuff, and I think I'm going to make a separate video on that and just include it, because with anything that has aggressive crossover points, you're going to get extreme changes in phase, and that's something that OTT is famous for, and it's part of the sound, to be honest, but it's something to watch out for, especially when you're mixing sources. Like you want to put OTT in parallel or something, or you want to put it on a source that's a different mic of the same thing. It's really going to drastically change the phase. And it's not like it's out of phase or in phase. It's drastic. But I want to do a separate video on phase, because a lot of things do that, and a lot of times we don't think about it until it causes problems. So thanks for watching. Long video. That's MO-TT. Go check it out. I think you can free trial the Slate All Access Pass anyway. So don't just take reviews. Go grab it, dive in. I hope I've explained the features. I know it's a complicated plugin, and a lot of people haven't kind of understood some of the features and said things like, it's bringing up a lot of noise. It's like, well, it's just bringing up the high end. There just happens to be noise. It's very complicated. So hopefully I've helped you get your head around it a little bit, and you've got something out of it. And I will see you next time.